Hi, and welcome to Uncover Your Story, the podcast for creatives, changemakers, and big-hearted rebels who believe in the power of stories to inspire, connect, and make a difference. I'm your host, Sarah Orton, brand photographer, storyteller, and content creator. I'll be drawing on my 20 years of experience working in communications to guide you through the storytelling process, from the mindset shift to the practical steps we can take to increase the impact of our work. I'm so excited to be here with you. You don't take a photograph, you make it. So you may recognize this quote, which comes from well-known American photographer and environmentalist Ansel Adams, and encapsulates his philosophy that when you take a photo, you're simply capturing what you see in front of you, registering an event, as it were, and there is little intentionality in it. But when you make a photo, you're engaging in a deliberate and creative act of vision and craft. This approach involves thoughtful decisions at every stage. It includes pre-visualization, capturing the image with specific intent, taking into account lighting, composition, angles, the lens you use, your connection with the subject, and then editing to refine the image and elevate the story you want to tell. It occurred to me that this is a great analogy for how we create stories as personal brands and the importance of crafting your story. As a business, we need to share information about ourselves and our services or products. And we can either take a blunt, what you see is what you get approach, just sharing the factual information, or we can intentionally craft a story that will resonate with our audience. Professional photography is never just about what we see in front of the camera. It's about how we choose to frame it and the myriad of choices that go into that. And storytelling works exactly the same way. Whether we're telling a story through a written narrative, images, or film, the framing we choose shapes how people experience the story. So today, I want to explore how we can use the lens of photography to help us think about crafting more soulful and intentional personal brand stories. Whether you're a founder, a creative, or a changemaker, this episode may help you see your brand storytelling through a new lens, understand how to craft your story rather than just share information. So let's break this down using photography as our guide. So when I'm behind the camera, every choice matters. The lens, where to focus, the angle, the light, the composition. Each one changes not only how the photograph looks, but also how it makes the viewer feel. The same is true in storytelling. The way we frame a story shapes the emotional connection we build with our audience. We're going to start with focus and how this relates to clarity and impact. In photography, focus determines exactly where the viewer's attention goes. Imagine a portrait where the subject's eyes are perfectly sharp, while the background softly blurs away. Your gaze goes straight to the person's expression. There's no doubt about what matters most. But if the photo is blurry and out of focus, then you don't know where to look, so the emotional impact is lost. The same thing happens with brand storytelling, where the technique for focusing comes from having absolute clarity on the foundation of your brand and ensuring any story you tell aligns with that foundation. And by foundation, I'm talking about having clearly articulated and written down your values and vision, who your ideal client is, and what your offer is or what transformation you help your clients achieve. Because if you aren't crystal clear about these foundations, then your story gets blurry and it gets lost in the noise. Getting this clarity is where so many purpose-led businesses struggle, especially when starting out. We often care about so many things: well-being, empowerment, community, change, and we want to talk about all of it. But when you try to say everything, you can end up saying nothing clearly. Let's look at an example. Imagine you're a coach who supports women in midlife. Here's the unfocused version of your brand story. I help women feel more balanced and fulfilled in their lives. It's nice, it's positive, but it's so broad that your ideal client might scroll past without even realizing you're speaking to her. Now here's the laser-focused version. I help women in midlife navigate career transitions with confidence so they can step into leadership roles without burning out or losing sight of themselves. See the difference? The second version instantly tells us who it's for: women in midlife. What's the transformation? Moving into leadership roles with confidence, and the specific pain point. avoiding burnout and staying true to themselves. That level of clarity is like bringing your subject's eyes into sharp focus in a photograph. Your audience knows exactly where to look, they feel the connection, and understand exactly how you can help them. So tying it back to photography, when I'm behind the camera, my job is to focus on what truly matters within the frame, usually the eyes of the person photographing. In storytelling, your job is to do the same thing with words. Cut through the noise, remove the distractions, and bring the transformation you offer into sharp, unmistakable clarity. When your story is focused in a way that resonates with your ideal client, your audience won't just see you, they'll feel that you're speaking to them and they will be drawn to work with you. Right, moving on to talking about lens and perspective. In photography, the lens you choose determines how much of a scene you're able to capture. So where a wide-angle lens can show a whole environment, giving the context, the background, and the bigger picture, a portrait lens can zoom right in for a sharp close-up on the subject and cuts out a lot of the picture, as well as putting the background into a soft focus. So in brand storytelling, we also need to think about what lens we're using and what perspective we're giving. Are you telling the story purely from your own point of view, or are you stepping into your client's shoes? For example, if you're a coach, you might be tempted to frame your story around your qualifications, your process, or why you started your business. But what if you changed the lens? What if you told it from your client's perspective, showing what transformation feels like for them? That shift in perspective can make your story infinitely more powerful, especially when chosen at the right moment for the right purpose. Of course, there are room for many different perspectives in our brand stories. But my point here is about being very intentional with the perspective you use every time you write a story and choosing the right perspective for the right moment, depending on who you are talking to and what you want to achieve. Next, we're going to talk angles, because the angle of a shot changes the entire meaning of an image. Typically, if the angle is looking up at someone, they can appear powerful and commanding. Look down and they seem vulnerable or humble. In storytelling, your angle is how you interpret events and information. Let's say you run a non-profit. You could frame your story around the challenges you face, the barriers, the hardships, the injustice, the fight. Or you could frame it around transformation, the moments of joy, the small wins, the hope you bring to others. Both angles are truthful, but they lead to very different feelings in the audience. This is why intentional framing matters so much. It's never about being dishonest. It's about choosing the story that serves your mission best. Over the last 2 decades, I've worked in charities and told stories intended to move people to donate, to act, or to change their health behaviour, for example. And during that time, approaches have shifted quite dramatically. In the past, the dominant pattern, particularly when telling stories for the purposes of fundraising, was to present people in need as victims, sad circumstances, urgent crises, suffering. The idea was to pull heartstrings. But that has several drawbacks. Ethical ones, because it can depersonalise people, strip out their agency, and reinforce negative stereotypes. But also it has effectiveness drawbacks, because people become numb, compassion fatigue sets in, and such narratives felt overused and disempowering. Today we see a different model gaining traction. Stories of resilience, dignity, transformation. Stories that still acknowledge hardship, but that also emphasise what the person with support has done and what joy or change has followed. These newer stories don't just say, look at this tragic situation, but look how someone is navigating it. Here is how they are rebuilding. Here is how your donation can be part of that transformation. We also see a push for authenticity and consent, giving people the chance to tell their own stories in their own words, avoiding tropes or sensationalism, and being transparent about impact, tying stories with data or evidence so that people not only feel moved, but trust that change really is happening. There's also a broader shift, moving away from purely emotional appeals towards frames of justice, community, systemic change. So stories are less about, this person was rescued by your generosity, and more about, this person is fighting alongside community and society has structural roles to play. And for personal brands interested in storytelling, even outside formal charities, the lessons are similar. We should aim for stories that are human, that show not just suffering and pain points, but which support and encourage agency, that connect rather than distance, that build trust, that allow for vulnerability, but also strength, that combine emotion and evidence, and that consider ethics and impact rather than seeking applause. Right, next we're going to talk about lighting, which sets the mood in photography. Harsh midday sun or flash photography can feel stark and dramatic. Soft, golden evening light feels warm and inviting. So in storytelling, your lighting is the tone you use. And your tone of voice is like the personality of your brand expressed through words. It's not just what you say, but how you say it, whether that be in your website copy, social posts, emails, conversations. So when you write or speak, think about, are you shining a warm, encouraging light? Or are you creating urgency and focus, or some other mood? Of course, depending on the message you're communicating, you will want to adjust the tone you use. Because just like your own voice, your brand voice can flex depending on the situation, while still sounding unmistakably like you. So think about how you speak to different people in your life. You might be gentle with a child, or playful, and obviously more formal with a client, and then relaxed with a close friend. Even though your words and style shift, the essence of who you are is always present. So the same goes for your brand. Your tone might adapt slightly depending on who you're talking to. So new clients versus loyal ones, for example, and what you're saying. Are you doing a big launch, or is it a quiet reflection piece? Also, where you're saying it. Is it an email? Is it an Instagram story? Your tone should be rooted in your values. And when you're clear on what you stand for, your tone naturally reflects that. For me, my values are joy, integrity, curiosity, compassion, and courage. They're at the heart of my work, and they directly influence the way I communicate across my brand. Once you've got your values clearly articulated, you can choose 3 or 4 tone of voice attributes which correlate to your values. So, for example, one of my tone of voice attributes is uplifting, and this allows my values of joy and compassion to show up in my uplifting tone of voice. I want people to feel welcomed and safe when they encounter my brand, like they've been invited into a space where they can breathe and just be themselves. So for me, when I'm sharing photos of clients on Instagram, this means making sure I share captions which really uplift my clients. Recently, I shared a photo of Leanne with this caption: "Behind every personal brand photo is a story. Leanne's love for sewing runs deep, passed down through generations of seamstresses in her family. At just 4, she proudly wore her first handmade creation, a belt, to school. By 16, she'd won her first competition for a garment she designed and made herself. Today, that same joy and skill shine through in every stitch as she continues to create and mend pieces with care and craftsmanship. I know because she's transformed several items of my clothing that I wanted reworking." So I shared these sort of posts consistently so that potential clients know that when they work with me, they will be getting someone who's going to lift them up on socials. Another one of my tone of voice attributes is inquisitive. So this allows my values of curiosity and courage to show up in my brand voice in different ways. It can be about asking questions and inviting people to reflect rather than telling them what to think. And sometimes it's about asking difficult questions. So on my podcast, this comes through naturally in the kinds of questions I ask my guests, like, for example, what's a story from your journey that shaped the work you do today? Or in my newsletter, it might sound like, lately, I've been reflecting on why so many of us women feel uncomfortable having our photos taken. Would you be willing to share what holds you back from booking a photo shoot? And then when mentoring a client on brand storytelling, it might involve a discussion around feelings of vulnerability when sharing personal stories online, and asking the questions that help the client work out the approach they want to take to sharing their stories. So you can see that it doesn't matter what the platform is or the topic, but using an inquisitive tone creates space for dialogue and deeper connection, and reflects my values of curiosity, joy, and compassion. The key thing here is that your tone of voice isn't something separate from your values. It's how your values sound. So when you know what you stand for, it becomes much easier to write captions, emails, podcast scripts, or website copy that feels like you. And one last thing on tone of voice, don't feel like you have to use all of your tone of voice attributes in every communication. So just like in photography, you adjust the light to fit the moment. For storytelling, this can mean dialing up or dialing down different attributes, depending on what it is you want to convey in that moment. Okay, on to composition, which in photography is all about how you arrange elements in the frame. A cluttered frame will leave the viewer's eye wandering all over the place, where a clean, intentional frame guides the eye straight to what matters. In storytelling, this correlates to structure. A strong brand story, like all good stories, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in very simple terms, it might look like this. Beginning, you set out the context and the problem. In the middle, you go through a bit of a journey or a process to tackle the problem. And the end, you get the resolution or the transformation. And this is where the real gold is in terms of opportunities to resonate with your audience. So having a clear structure is so important, because if you don't clearly communicate the problem in the first place, then the audience has no reason to see how you can help them, which also applies to if you don't clearly articulate the transformation. And then the middle bit, the journey, is important to show as it helps build trust. The audience can start to see how you can help them move from the problem to the transformation. Having a clear structure ensures that your core message doesn't get lost. So just like I use composition to remove distractions from personal brand photos, you can apply this principle when you edit your story so it's clear and powerful. And then we get to what I think is the most powerful part, and that's showing what's behind the eyes, showing the emotional truth. A technically perfect photo might be beautiful, but if there's no emotion in it, it won't resonate. And the same is true of storytelling. The facts and figures matter, yes, but what moves people to action is emotional truth. Emotional truth isn't about exaggeration or manipulation. It's about sharing the why behind what you do. Basically, what I'm talking about here is taking the show, don't tell approach, which I shared about in detail in episode 5. So, for example, instead of saying, I started my photography business to help female founders, I might share, when I saw yet another incredible woman founder struggle to find a photo that truly reflected who she was, the spark in her eyes, the magic of her vision, I knew I wanted to change that. It's the same message, but one is based on facts and the other is all about the feeling. Facts inform us, but stories move us. So let me give you another example. You could say, in the UK, only 1 in 5 new businesses are started by women, and less than 2% of equity funding currently goes to female-founded companies. Now that's important, but statistics alone rarely move us to action. Now imagine hearing the story of a woman who launched her business despite endless obstacles, lack of funding, societal expectations, maybe family resistance. You feel her determination. You see her late-night brainstorming sessions at the kitchen table. You celebrate her first client win with her and feel pride for her as she shares how she went on to build a profitable and purpose-led business against the odds. That's how you show the emotional truth. And that's what builds connection. Because people remember how you made them feel long after they forget the numbers. Okay, next we're going to talk about exposure, editing, and mindset. When it comes to running a personal brand, mindset plays a huge role in how we shape and share our stories. There's a lot of pressure these days to show up authentically, but I think there's often a misunderstanding about what that really means. Authenticity doesn't mean sharing everything, every doubt, every fear, every behind-the-scenes detail, especially if doing so doesn't feel good to you. And crafting your story doesn't make you fake or inauthentic either. So just like a photographer doesn't show every image they take, you get to choose which moments to bring into the light and how you frame them. Think of it like setting the exposure on a camera. If the image is overexposed, it's flooded with light and the subject can disappear in the glare. That's kind of like oversharing, giving so much away that it overwhelms both you and your audience. If it's underexposed, it's too dark to see the details clearly, which is kind of like hiding so much of yourself that people can't connect with you. So finding the right balance is about choosing the light that tells the truest version of your story while protecting the parts of your life that are private or sacred. And this is where editing comes in. In photography, editing isn't about making an image fake. And just to clarify here, I'm not talking about the sort of editing that AI now makes possible where you completely change reality. I'm talking about like traditional, professional editing, which can include many things, such as cropping out distractions, increasing or decreasing the exposure, playing with the warmth or coolness in the colours, things like that. So it's all to make the image be seen and convey the story the photographer wants to make. And when you edit your story, you're doing the same thing. You're bringing clarity and intention to how you want to be seen and what you want to communicate. Okay, so let me share a personal example, which, to be honest, has nothing to do with my business, But it struck me as a good example to demonstrate what I mean about how mindset and framing can play such an important role in the messages we convey to ourselves and others through stories we tell. So back in 2020, I was due to marry my boyfriend. We'd poured so much into our wedding, which was going to be a weekend festival-style celebration in a beautiful woodland grove with us and the guests staying in yurts. Financially, emotionally, all the time and energy that goes into planning such a big celebration, it was a lot. And then the pandemic hit. It was touch and go whether it would happen at all, and we thought we might lose our big deposit. But it ended up being postponed for a year. And it was a year of not knowing whether the lockdown rules would allow for our wedding of almost 100 guests to take place. Literally, the rules were changed and lifted a week before our wedding date. And that was when we got confirmation our wedding would go ahead. So when the day finally arrived in 2021, it was anything but smooth. We arrived at the site on the Friday for a pre-wedding party, but my eldest daughter was ill and I wasn't able to join the guests that evening. Then while we were asleep in the yurts that night, a massive thunderstorm rolled through and I got about 3 hours sleep and was just worrying about what the weather was going to be like the next day and how much mud there'd be. The next morning, I was not looking or feeling my best. Then when the moment came for me to put on my dress and go out for the ceremony, my youngest injured her elbow really badly and I had to keep the guests waiting for 2 hours while I calmed her down and got her treated. At one point, I was completely overwhelmed and heartbroken that the day I'd envisioned just wasn't unfolding how I'd hoped. But then my mum said something that shifted everything. She said, "Sarah, you never do things the easy way," which is something she has repeated to me throughout my life, and she certainly has a point. But then she added, "But look, the storm has passed, the sun is now shining, and the guests are waiting for you. This is like an epic love story about overcoming the odds to make it work." So that reframing was like adjusting the exposure on a photograph, and I started to see the day differently, not as a series of disasters telling me that I shouldn't be getting married, but it was a story of resilience, love, and celebration. And then when I walked through that beautiful forest glade with Nick, the sun was shining and we arrived at the ceremony with Stand By Me being played by a band made for our friends and family. And it really was a magical moment. In writing this podcast episode, I hesitated to share that story for a number of reasons. I wasn't sure if it was relevant or if it was too personal, but I think it just makes a really good analogy for how we share our stories in our business. There are a lot more details to that day, which of course I haven't shared. I've shared just the right amount for what feels good to me and to communicate my message, which is you get to choose how to frame your own story. You decide what you bring into focus, what you leave in the shadows, and how you edit the narrative so it feels true and empowering, both for you and your audience. So how can you take these ideas and apply them to your own brand storytelling? Just to recap, here is a simple framework drawn from photography. Number 1, choose your lens. Decide whose perspective you're telling the story from. Is it your voice, your clients, the community you serve? For example, a wellness coach might tell their own journey to show empathy, or they might share a client's success story to demonstrate impact. Number 2, select your angle and focus. Consider the angle you're taking. Are you focusing on challenges, transformation, possibility? Both can be true, but which one serves your audience best right now? And of course, the story can include multiple truths, but the angle is about where the main focus is put. Number 3, light it well. Use your tone to set the mood. Do you want to inspire, comfort, challenge, energize? Just make sure that you align your tone with your brand values. Number 4, compose intentionally. Structure your story clearly. Problem, journey, resolution. Edit out anything that doesn't serve the main message, just like clearing your cluttered photo frame. Number 5, reveal what's behind the eyes. So show emotion through specific details. Don't just say, care about my clients. Show us through a real moment or story that proves it. Framing is a conscious act. Whether you're behind a camera or crafting a narrative, you have the power to shape what people see, and more importantly, what they feel. By thinking like a photographer, choosing your lens, your angle, your light, your composition, you can tell brand stories that resonate deeply and reveal the emotional truth at the heart of your work. So as you share your next story, pause for a moment, ask yourself, how do I want to frame this? And to wrap up, I'm just going to leave you with one more quote from Ansel Adams, which I think is just gorgeous. He said, "Life is your art. An open, aware heart is your camera. A oneness with your world is your film. Your bright eyes and easy smile is your museum." If today's episode sparked ideas for your own brand storytelling, I'd love to help you take it further. You can always download my free guide with tips for crafting soulful brand stories. You'll find the link in the show notes. And if you're ready for a more personal, hands-on approach, I offer brand clarity and storytelling support designed to help you share your stories in a way that feels good for you. Again, you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. Keep framing your stories with heart, purpose and passion, and I'll see you next time. Until then, uncover your story, own it, share it, and shine.